vile menagerie of villains you must confront.
I call myself Frank. It's not my real name. It's one of the many aliases I've used over the years. I was using several different names when I first started writing about the Martian Manhunter on the internet in the late 90s. Initially, I wrote about him on the DC Comics message board, and when I wanted to write about him more extensively, I started a web TV fan site, initially called Zonzor, and then later Martian Manhunter, the Rock of the JLA. I shut that down early into the new millennium and left it to lie fallow for about 5 years. And then I was inspired to start a daily blog beginning in 2007 that ran until 2014. Producing 365 posts a year for 7 years can get to be quite a slog, and that last year especially I was very burnt out on it. My plan was to continue through 2015, which is the 60th anniversary of the creation of John Jones, the Manhunter from Mars. But then this past summer, I started a podcast with my good friends Illegal Machine and Mr. Fixit. The Idol-Head of Diabolu blog had a zombie life for a few months there where I was basically just reposting stuff from DeviantArt. But eventually the Marvel Superheroes podcast overwhelmed my time and my enthusiasm, and I just gave up on keeping up with the blog. I still feel pretty guilty about missing that 60th anniversary year, though, so I've decided to start this podcast to keep the blog alive and to make sure that there is some commemoration of the Martian Manhunter 60th anniversary, because Lord knows DC Comics isn't going to do anything. And I also hope that where a podcast killed the Martian Manhunter blog, podcasting may be able to resurrect it. My most basic plan for the podcast is to offer a roughly weekly indexing series to look at Martian Manhunter stories produced at least throughout the Silver and Bronze Ages. So if you're a fan of the Marvel Superheroes podcast, know that this is going to be a much drier show. It's mostly going to be me alone, talking at length about a fairly unpopular character. So if you're looking for cursing and camaraderie, you should probably look elsewhere. This is sort of the 0 episode of the podcast, and because the anniversary year hasn't officially started yet, I wanted to look at a precursor to the Martian Manhunter rather than diving straight into the character himself, and look a little bit into his origins, of his creation, what little we know about it anyway. He's quite the mystery. Across Gotham City, there falls an alien, sinister shadow from outside, the mysterious menace of a cryptic criminal who challenges Batman and Robin to a supreme struggle. And when the great detective duo fights crime that is really from out of this world, they need not only their own genius, but also the skillful help of the Manhunter from Mars. You might be surprised to learn that title, the Manhunter from Mars, came from Batman number 78, cover dated August-September 1953. The story was written by Edmund Hamilton, drawn by Lou Schwartz, with inks by Charlie Paris, and Bob Kane gets credit in there somewhere because DC signed a contract with him. In the 10-page story, an incredible new bandit known only as the Stranger begins a crime spree in Gotham City where he displays superhuman powers. Commissioner Gordon calls in the Dark Knight duo to help with the investigation. Batman notes, queer, how he always steals powerful weapons as well as other loot when he commits his robberies. From all indications, the Stranger is some thwarted scientific genius using his knowledge for crime. Nothing else could explain the incredible things he's done. The Cape Crusaders look at the pattern of the Stranger's robberies, and working backwards from his first crime, they end up surveying a nearby wooded area, where they discover a small spaceship. While trying to find a way into the first craft, a second appears. The dynamic duo lay in ambush until the hatch of the second ship opens, and they leap upon the green-skinned alien that emerges. They're surprised to learn that not only does he know English, but he's actually familiar with the pair. The alien explains, "We've kept our scientific civilization secret from you Earth inhabitants because we want to keep our peaceful world unchanged. Only to pursue a dangerous Martian criminal have I, Roh Kar, first Lawman of Mars, come to Earth. You see, our televisoscopes have long enabled us to watch events on Earth. Roh Kar is an avid viewer of the adventures of Batman and Robin, and while his fellow Martians recognize him as a great crime fighter, there's so little crime on Mars that Roh Kar doesn't get much of an opportunity to show off his skills." He continues, "Yes, we have little crime on peaceful Mars. Weapons are almost unknown there, all of which enabled a distorted genius named Quark to embark on a career of evil. Stolen Martian technology allowed Quark to fly and turn invisible. Roh Kar was hot on his trail, though, until Quark stole a secret experimental spaceship and made off for Earth. Thankfully, there was a spare, and Roh Kar was able to follow him with it. Roh Kar asserted to Batman, "My detection instruments finally led me here, to Quark's hidden ship. He must be caught before he uses Martian science to commit crime on Earth." Batman explained that it was too late to stop that from happening, but the combined detective skills of Batman, Robin, and Roh Kar could allow for the capture of the Stranger before any other Earthlings learned of the existence of Martian civilization, which Roh Kar desperately wanted to keep secret. As it happened, Roh Kar had what he called a human compass. You see, every human brain radiates a faint electric wave, and brain waves, like fingerprints, are never the same in different people. This compass is tuned to Quark's wave and is now pointing directly toward him. The trio swiftly catch up with the stranger. However, Quark uses his invisibility halo to snatch and smash the human compass. Quark then knocks out and kidnaps Robin, which keeps the Lawman of Mars and Batman of Earth at bay until Quark can escape. Roh Kar managed to slip a tiny Martian detectophone device into the stranger's pocket. Its receiver picked up any sounds in the area, so the detectives were able to deduce where the stranger had gone to from sounds that they heard. The Batman was afraid that Quark would murder Robin if they saw the Bat plane in use. But Roh Kar had personal jet flight units that would allow the detectives to swiftly and stealthily reach Quark's location. Our heroes learned that Quark's plan was to take as many earthly weapons as he could get his hands on back to Mars, which was relatively defenseless. As it turned out, though, Martians also were acclimated to breathing in thin air, so Batman opened up some gas canisters and felled Quark with oxygen intoxication. There's a great thought balloon. It's working. He's becoming slap happy. Batman still had to save Robin, who was tied up to a missile, using his jetpack. Roh Kar then promised Quark, "We're going back to Mars, criminal. You'll never escape from the moon prison there." To put the story in historical context, 15 years earlier, Superman had debuted in Action Comics #1. The following year, the first successful knockoff of Superman, Batman, made his debut, also published by National Periodical Publications, which would later become DC Comics. Because it was superhero fans who got to decide what was the Golden Age, what was the Silver Age, and so forth, by 1950, the Golden Age was over. This was determined because the superhero fad had begun to fade during World War II. By 1948, most of your superhero titles were getting canceled. At National, Julie Schwartz was editing most of the superhero books they were putting out and putting them to rest. He was canceling them and replacing them with westerns and especially science fiction titles, which matched up with his background as one of the early editors and agents for science fiction writing. Also by that point, Wonder Woman's creator and writer William Moulton Marston had passed on, and her title had been taken over by Robert Kanigher. Jack Schiff was the editor of the two Batman books, Batman and Detective, as well as World's Finest, the team-up book with Superman, where superheroes were in steep decline at that point. The one that was bucking the trend was Superman. He had gotten a movie serial, which became a very successful television show, The Adventures of Superman, starring George Reeves. Editor Mort Weisinger had revamped the comic books to take advantage of the zeal for science fiction. He had new artists on the books, new writers, and they were producing material that was selling very well. Under Jack Schiff's editorship, the Batman titles were still roughly in their classic era. Batman and Robin were still fighting gangsters and more familiar rogues, Joker, Catwoman, the Riddler, and the like. So it hadn't gotten bonkers yet. But sales were perhaps not what they could have been, certainly by comparison to Superman. And more sci-fi elements started to creep in. Some favorable mail on this Manhunter from Mars story might have kept the idea in Schiff's mind. There were only superficial similarities between the Martians presented here and the ones in the later John Jones strip, mainly that they were green-skinned and that they wore X-shaped chest straps, which were straight out of Edgar Rice Burroughs anyway. Mostly it was just the commonality of tropes related to Mars. Whatever potential may have been seen in the title, The Manhunter from Mars, I doubt that anybody saw Roh Kar as a viable protagonist beyond this point. He was essentially a Batman fanboy who relied on gadgets rather than any great skill as a detective, and he had no superpowers. It also didn't help that Roh Kar was dorky looking even by 1953 standards, and they drew him with facial construction that seems somewhat ethnic, we'll say. And he tended to pull a lot of goofy expressions, so it was clear that he wasn't intended to be a starring character. Roh Kar has occasionally been referred to as the Golden Age Martian Manhunter. Obviously, that's a misnomer. For starters, he's never referred to as either the Martian Manhunter or even the Manhunter from Mars. That's just the story title. When he's not referred as Roh Kar, he's called the Lawman of Mars or the first Lawman of Mars. You know, the whole concept of a Golden Age versus a Silver Age hero, that comes from those early comic book fans, and I don't think that they would see a 1.5 to 2 year difference as being enough to qualify as two different ages, especially since neither Roh Kar nor John Jones were debuted in an official age, although that early point of the 50s is sometimes referred to as the atomic age of comics. I tend to think of it as the gray period, this transitional era where comics became less prominent in the mainstream, television began to usurp the role that comics had played, and many of the popular themes of comics during this period were borrowed from the pulps and film and transitioned to television, but comics don't own westerns and sci-fi and gang stories the way that they do superheroes. Roh Kar has never appeared in another story. The closest he came was in the 2006 Martian Manhunter miniseries, where a character was referred to as Roh Kar, but he was a throwaway, appeared for a few panels, and in no way resembled the Roh Kar of this story. One element I do think is important to note, though, is that in 1995, Les Daniels credited the script for The Strange Experiment of Dr. Erdell to Mort Weisinger in his book DC Comics 60 Years of the World's Favorite Comic Book Heroes. In 1997, Gerard Jones and Will Jacobs also noted that the John Jones character was created by Joe Samachson and Mort Weisinger. Now, Mort Weisinger, of course, was the famous editor of Superman, but he was also the co-creator of Aquaman, a ripoff of Namor, Green Arrow, a ripoff of the Green Archer, and Johnny Quick, a ripoff of The Flash. Weisinger might have seen Roh Kar and thought that he could do something with that basic premise. Of course, in more recent years, DC Comics has stopped allowing for the crediting of Mort Weisinger since they've never credited their editors in the creation of their characters. The actual writer of the script, Joe Samachson, and artist Joe Certa are now considered the co-creators of Martian Manhunter officially. It doesn't take a genius to see that Roh Kar probably played at least a small part in the creation of the later character. It's not like Roh Kar's creators were any slouches. Edmund Hamilton was an early science fiction writer. He's credited as helping to create and popularize the subgenre of space opera and was the main writer for Captain Future. He was also the husband of Lee Brackett, who Star Wars fans will recognize as the writer of the first draft of The Empire Strikes Back. Meanwhile, Lou Schwartz was one of the main ghost artists for work credited to Bob Kane, and he was the co-founder of a film production company. If you have any more interest in Roh Kar, look to our blogs, either my Idol-Head of Diabolu blog or the Rolled Spine podcast blog, where I'll offer up links to the character's biography. And I even have a commission by Tom Zoller, the creator of Love and Capes and a popular artist on My Little Pony. Do check that out. I'm not sure if the next episode will be in a week or 2 weeks. I'm going to shoot for a weekly format in 2015, but I'm not trying to kill myself getting this started. But more than likely, there will be at least one more episode in the 2014 calendar year, and that one will be devoted to Despero.